Okay, so my name is Ron Prada. I'm from the package team. We have set up this meeting to sync on a couple of issues related with the container registry, namely the deployments and the migrations for the upcoming database. So one of the issues that we highlighted is that with the current manual process, manual deployment process, it's a bit difficult for us to have some certainty about when the deployment is going to happen, if there is any developer around when that happens. And these issues were not a concern so far because mostly we have been doing 1, 2 at most registry deployments per month. So it's not a big issue to have that, and most of those were minor improvements or something that's strictly not related with any functionality on the API. But with the upcoming database for the registry, this is going to be a major feature, and with everything major, we expect to find some bugs. And one of the concerns that we have is that we need to be fast to mitigate those bugs when we find them, especially because we'll be dealing with the database now. So any bugs that persist for more than a couple of hours a day might start creating data inconsistencies on the database, which in turn may require us to do some data repairs. And if it takes 1 or 2 days to get a new version deployed, it might be too long for waiting to fix that bug. And in the same way, it will also be good to have some predictability around the deployment windows and the cadence, which we don't have at the moment. So it's mostly on demand. We tag a new release, we bump the version in CNG, wait for that to be merged, and then we have to bump the version in Kubernetes workflows and wait for that to be merged, and then someone, I assume, picks up that task on background and actually rolls out the new version to the various environments. And there is also no observability around when that deployment happens. So there is no notification. Currently, what the development team is doing is basically see if the Kubernetes workflow MR has been merged, and then periodically check the Grafana dashboard to see what version of the registry is displayed for each one of the environments. So one of our requests was around automating the current process before adding any of the database logic. So automate just what we know right now, which is a process that we have been using for months. And once that would be stable, we could focus in adding additional functionality to support the database migrations, which will be the new factor here. But from what I'm understanding, this might not be the best solution, or it's not a viable solution. Do you want to comment on that, Marin and Amy?
So I'm going to butcher your name, so please correct me. João?
João.
João. Okay, almost there, almost. Not really. But there are a couple of things you mentioned that I do need to address, and that will direct the conversation, I think, in a direction. So you mentioned like the fact that developers are not around when things get rolled out. You mentioned especially the need for mitigating fast, especially with the database changes coming in, then predictability around when things are going to get deployed, and then also no observability around when the deploy is going to come. So before we can even talk about anything like that, I can give you a bit of history around like how deployments looked at GitLab, even prior Registry being migrated to Kubernetes, just to paint you a picture of what the order of execution was of certain things. So I'm not going to go in deep history like 8 years ago, but let's go 2 years ago, which is where a lot of these stories start. We did have a lot of problems because we would be deploying when the developers are not around. And one of the reasons why we went down the route of creating quality pipelines, so automated GitLab QA, is to remove the need for developers to be around to begin with. So in order for us to remove the need for anyone to monitor a specific line of code that is going anywhere, we do automation. And then what happens if you and Haley might not, like, you rolled things out, but you might go on a vacation the next day, right? That's why you want to remove the manual intervention. The fast mitigation goes down the route of reverting quick. It doesn't go around the route fixing quick. So if there is something that is happening in production, for example, that is not something that you want, something that you didn't expect, you're not going to be spending those, I don't know, however long that thing lasts, trying to fix the problem, because during that situation, you are likely to introduce even more problems because you're trying to rush a fix. Instead, what we do is write code so that you can easily revert it back, or as easily as possible, right? In registry situation, that should be, because it's a new service, that should be done from the start. So thinking about backwards and forwards compatibility is really important, which then brings me back to the point one. If we do that, then if we do the automated QA tests, then the backward and forwards compatibility gets exposed to you immediately as soon as things go into pipelines, right? So you don't have to think about whether you're going to be able to mitigate fast, because you will be able to roll back fast so that you can then resolve a problem later on. And then predictability around deploys. We only got to this point around May last year, where we would be deploying much more frequently and we would have a certain cadence of this deployment, but we only got there because of number one and number two partially, which is we can give a very predictable pattern of how are we going to be rolling things out in production, because we can depend on the automation to tell us when something is okay or not, and then we can set up windows where things will just get rolled out, whether with some guidance by humans, right, like semi-automated by clicking buttons, or fully automatically that we have right now in a lot of the environments. And then no observability around when something happens. That is something that we shouldn't necessarily care about on the level of I want to know when something goes in production so I can catch a problem. It should go down the direction of I want to know when something went in production so I know how to communicate with other stakeholders that something went in production, right? And this is where for example, in GitLab's case, in GitLab Rails case, we added that MR widget that you see, like probably see where, oh, this was deployed at staging, canary, production at this point in time. So I guess that is the whole story. And I think I was trying to convey that message throughout our discussions. And that's why I also asked about the container registry, new architecture. How are these deployments going to look like, especially with database migration between the two components? Because then you have two squared problems, right? You need to think about GitLab Rails back and forth, and you need to think about container registry back and forth, and in which orders those two can actually happen. And if I think about the problem and how we resolved the complexity of this, the steps were very clear. We added first a set of tests that are repeatable, that are failing reliably. So things are passing reliably, but if something is broken, they fail reliably and they stop the things before they even go to any of the environments. Then we have a set of tests that are executed against certain environments that are the same way, right? Like reliable. We can reliably say that what we currently have right now is working as we want it, as intended. And then only we started thinking about how do we quickly mitigate things, right? Like how do we go back and forward? So how do we revert quickly? And then the tests that we have in the background running actually expose problems as things go along, and so on and so on. The observability part, or rather how do we communicate a change, that goes to the very end of that pipeline, meaning at the very end, we would be thinking about how quickly can we do that, because we obviously also have limited amount of time to actually address everything that you mentioned. So we kind of focus on the bigger bang for our buck. So sorry, I spoke a lot, and I feel now that I need to drink some water. Does that help at all? Does that give you like the context? And do you have any questions on that one?
Yeah, it helps, but at the same time, I understand that there is a lot of history in regards to the GitLab Rails tooling processes and all of that. That probably took more than a year to build, right?
Yep.
And a year is not exactly what we had in mind to be able to roll out this change.
Right. And I'm not saying this would last a year. What I'm saying is that there is an order under which we can then collaborate and do this faster. So if you create right now tests that we already needed for the past, I don't know how much time, like we migrated Registry to Kubernetes without that visibility, and that was a huge risk on our part. But that was the risk that the delivery team took, and that is the risk the delivery team can't take now, mostly because there are way more things that are running in Kubernetes or any other things that are happening in the background that are affecting the work.
Okay, so how do you think that we can move forward? For example, you mentioned that we need to take into account the conciliation between the registry and GitLab Rails, their migrations, how they play with each other. But at least for the foreseeable future, let's say half a year, at least that won't be a problem, because we won't have any new features that would be exposed in GitLab. So at least for now, we can iterate and leave that as a problem for the future. So
step 5 or whatever step ends up being, right? Like, I agree with that. It's more about I wanted to make you aware of the situation so that you can think about it right now and note it down as a potential problem and put some rail guards around it, right? Like in your processes, you're a small team, so you can still do things as a small team can do, which is I have an, I don't know, issue template or a merge request template where it says, if you have a Rails companion, talk with, I don't know, team lead, right? And that will get us quite far when it comes to prioritization of what we need to do. So we don't need to do that immediately, but we need to note it down as a real case if we think it's a real case.
Okay. Yeah, so that's mostly why I added that note to the new architecture document. So that's,
and I saw it. Yeah, that was a really good addition.
That's how I see it to work. Although we don't need it now, we at least have a plan for it in future. So for now, how do you think that we can proceed? Can we address any of the concerns around observability?
I would first reach out to whoever the quality counterpart is, so that you can sit down with them and work through the requirements that probably both sides, both you from package team and also quality counterpart would be able to address. Like, what are the most critical paths in registry functionality that you expect will be changing with the database migrations that you're going to be introducing. So I don't expect you all to go and cover registry all of the tests, right? Like, I don't know whether that's even possible, but we need to think about the class of tests that we want to cover, which is the most critical user-facing tests. So we call them smoke tests for everything else, right? Like, if you cannot push and pull from GitLab, and that needs to reliably fail, that can happen, right? So if we're thinking about registry, probably that would be push and pull to begin with, right? So if you introduce something in your database and your registry depends on it, I want to see it immediately. It can't go to any environment. It can't stop super critical workloads, right? So define at least the top critical QA tests that we can be added. We then can incorporate those QA tests into the existing pipelines that we have right now, which automatically tells us whether this works or not, right? Like, we then have the coverage that we need. And then we can work through the rest of the things, which is going to be now that we are going to be running a migration, we can discuss how those migrations will run. And we now have the backing of those automated tests to decide which way we are going to go, right? Like that, whether we are going to go very basic and say we're just going to add registry migration, database migration at the stage of Rails migration, right? Like it doesn't matter like how long registry runs, we can just run those migrations. Or if the changes in registry are super critical, maybe we need to align them with the deploy. Again, I'm just painting a picture here. It's all about the order of execution that allows us to open up more of these discussion points and like do things quicker. So I'm not talking about a year here. I'm just talking about a closer collaboration that will shorten that time as much as possible, but it has to happen in a certain order. It can't be, let's figure out the migrations and then we'll write tests. And we need quicker way of deploying registry to production. But we don't have the test, nor do we have a correct way of reverting things back and forth, right? Like that's basically what I'm asking, you know?
Okay. Okay, yeah, we have, I think, a solid test coverage at the moment, including integration tests, but we don't have any QA tests for the registry.
Tests. Yeah, yeah.
We do have now a team member in the package team from the quality team, so that might help. Would this require a substantial effort from the delivery team as well? Once we need to,
once the quality pipelines are there, no, that would be the not significant effort. Like there would be effort, but not significant effort. And as long as you give us a heads up via an issue that you are starting to work on this, we can put that into our backlog. You can tell us like you're approximately expecting this to be done, I don't know, in 2 weeks or a month or however much time it takes. We can put it in our scheduling, and we can just wait for the outcome and implement it.
Okay, so the basic idea would be to build a QA pipeline for the registry.
Not pipeline, but the test. We can build a pipeline, right? Like when you have the testing, we can then add that to the existing pipeline.
Okay. So building those tests, having those integrated into the current deployment process. That's right. Yeah. And then look at integrating database migrations in that process as well.
Correct.
Okay.
At that point, like if you think about the timelines for delivery of all of these things, the database is not going to be provisioned overnight. It's not going to happen tomorrow, right? Like there is work that needs to be done in automating that or provisioning that. So by the time you actually get the full database that you can use for this, I don't know how big it is. I don't know how it looks, but there is some room for you to actually go and cover this in parallel while you're waiting for the database instead of developing additional features, right? I'm not saying that you are doing that. I'm just saying there is some room to do that, as if I can imagine.
Yeah. The data store team is working on the new database clusters. I believe they will be ready by the end of the year, so we should have some headroom to account for that. Do you think this would be an opportunity for a closer collaboration between package and delivery? A couple of times it has come up as a possible working group, because this is quite a large change, and after this work we need to start working on deploying it to production and then migrating from the current registry to the new one. So there is an issue for that. I believe you actually pinged people from the delivery team on that. So we also pinged a lot of other people to review it. So that's another concern that we have. So there is quite some work to do here, and probably it would be good to have some attention from the delivery team, probably from other teams in infrastructure as well, because of course everyone is helpful and available to help, but it would be good if some people had some dedication to this effort and at least some headroom to play with.
So I'm not really sure I understand the ask, but are you asking about creating a working group for this, or are you just wanting to have someone who will be helping you out in the project as you organize it? Like, I'm not really sure I follow that.
Yeah. So for this effort to create the QA tests, we will need some validation that our plan is aligned with the delivery expectations. So
Mm-hmm.
that would be the validation. But then later on, when the registry with the database is already deployed in production, we will have to start the migration phase,
Mm-hmm.
and that will probably require some work around at least observability with new dashboards to track the
Right.
progress, migrations, and all of that. So I would expect that to require also some work from infrastructure.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. It will require some work from infrastructure. It's just that I don't really necessarily know this very moment. Maybe if you have like the start of the project, maybe we can get involved then and see whether it's necessary to actually create a more regular sync. Whether that's going to be through a working group, most likely, right? Because you have quality counterpart, you have infrastructure, you like development, probably some prioritization from product as well to make sure that you can move forward. So probably would need to be, I don't know if it needs to be a working group, but definitely a more regular sync on priorities. So someone needs to drive that project, that is for sure. So it's not as one thing, it needs to be organized for sure.
Okay. Okay. I guess we'll speak with quality engineer on our team and try to come up with a plan for the QA tests.
Mm-hmm.
Once we have a draft of that, we can loop the delivery team on that to validate the plan.
So are you aware of the readiness review and the readiness, the whole process that is out there?
Sorry, can you repeat?
Are you aware of the readiness review process?
No.
Okay, so I want to give you just a link just to see like what kind of questions infra actually asks. You are though in a good situation as the team that is controlling registry because a lot of the things you already completed, right? Like the lab kit. Oh my God, every time. Lab kit, for example, is in registry, right? Like observability registry is generally good. So you probably won't be handling majority of those things, but I can give you the link just to have a general idea of what infrastructure is usually interested about. So that's with the new service called CAS. That service didn't go, infrastructure got asked in the end, like roll it out in production was the ask, and we had a lot of things missing to do that. So it might be good to just check it out and see if you're noticing something that you might be missing for registry right now. I think it shouldn't be because registry in general is in a good shape. Yeah, I'll share it with you real quick. I'll leave it in here. Cool. All right. Yeah, and I think I participated here mostly because Amy is still getting up to speed with this. But I think going forward, Amy should be your point of contact. She knows a lot of these things, and she can help you prioritize things. And obviously, I'll be there to help out with anything necessary. So you can always also continue reaching out to me.
Okay. Okay. We are running out of time. I don't know if you have any questions, Ailey.
No, that was that was very expansive in this coverage of concerns.
I hope helpful as well, not only expensive.
That goes unspoken. I particularly appreciate the point about not necessarily needing us, because that does not sound like a good situation to get in, to us have to babysit deployments since we are but two.
Yeah,
Okay, so I'll stop the recording now. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for setting this up, and thanks for the questions and listening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.